Today's shiur begins on Daf Yutes with the beginning of the new parak, the second parak of Sotah, parak Hoyonoitel. The parak continues with laws concerning the mincha and the drinking of the Sotah in the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishnah says, Hoyonoitel es minchasa mitoch kfifa mitzris. The husband that is, of course, bringing his wife to the Beis Hamikdash, he takes the meal offering from the reed basket. The kfifa mitzritz is the reed basket that contained the barley flour that they brought from their home to the Beis Hamikdash, and now they take it v'noisna l'soich kli shares, and it's placed into a sanctified Beis Hamikdash service vessel. V'noisna al yada, and the mincha is placed on her arms. V'kohen meniach es yado mitachteha, and the Kohen places his hands underneath. Menif is an action, in translated often means it's a waving action. It's a movement of the mincha in various directions, and after they move the mincha in various directions while it's supported on their arms, Heinif vehegish komatz vehiktir. So there's the tenufa. Heinif is also referred to as the tenufa, the waving. Vehegish is the carrying of the mincha to the corner of the mizbeach, the southwestern corner. Komatz, a handful of the mincha is taken from the bowl. Vehiktir, and that handful is put in the fire on the mizbeach. And the balance is then consumed by the kohanim. A number of these points we've learned in recent dapim, laws regarding the mincha. So this should sound somewhat familiar. The Mishnah goes on with the points that sound familiar, that not only sound repetitive. The Gemara will deal with that particular problem. Hoyamashke v'achar kach makriv es minchasa. She would drink the Sotah water, and then the mincha would be offered. And the problem, the superficial problem, is that the Mishnah just mentioned before that the mincha was already burnt. Already, the handful was already burnt. So, what does makriv minchasa mean over here? It's already gone. Well, we'll wait for the Gemara to explain. You notice the markings. These double underlines and the squiggle underlined in the middle with v'achakach highlighted is to give a sense of order. So the first opinion, and you can see we've labeled it number 1, is she drinks the Sotah water, then the mincha is offered. And on the side of the Gemara, under our mivneh structural note, we've indicated this marking highlights mashke and makriv, and ma koidem, which comes first. Machlokes Tanakama v'Rabbi Shimon. So we see here the Tanakama's idea of order is first she drinks the Sotah water, and then the mincha is offered. Rabbi Shimon oimer makriv es minchasa v'achar kach hoyo mashke. First the mincha is offered, and then she drinks. Shenemar, the pasuk says v'achar yashke es ho'isha samayim. This pasuk seems to be very order-oriented. V'achar it gives you a sense of priority, which is first, which is second. It says, and then she drinks, which indicates that prior to that, the mincha was offered. That would then substantiate Reb Shimon's opinion. Of course, we have to see sources for the Rabbanan as well. Im hishka v'achar kach hikriv es minchasa, if the order was reversed, Kshera, Rabbi Shimon says it nevertheless is acceptable. Let us point out something that you'll see in the course of the sugya when you study it together with Rashi, that the effectiveness of the water, let us say she's guilty, and we've learned already that if she is guilty, so the water will kill her, the drinking will kill her. The effectiveness of the water is dependent on the offering of the mincha, so that even if you hold that she drinks first, and then the mincha is offered, the water, according to that approach, won't have immediate effect. It will have effect only once the mincha is offered. Before we go further, we take a look at the side. We have a topic heading, which reads Tenufa b'bailim. The idea of the waving is to include the owner of the korban. The concept of tenufa you find in different korbanos, different things that are offered in the Beis Hamikdash. Where do you know that the owner, in this case the woman, is considered the owner of the korban, that she's supposed to participate in the waving? Now the Gemara. Omar lei Rabbi Ozer l'Rabbi Yoshia de Dorei. Rabbi Ozer is an Amora. His name is really Rabbi Ozer ben Pedos, and he is speaking to Rabbi Yoshia of his Rabbi Ozer's generation, meaning Rabbi Ozer's contemporary, more or less, maybe even a little younger. The reason for referring to Rabbi Yoshia in this fashion, Rabbi Yoshia de Dorei, is because there was a Tana who apparently had experienced some longevity, who lived into this generation. Rabbi Ozer ben Pedos was an early Amora, and so in order to distinguish between the elder Rabbi Yoshia and this younger one, the Gemara refers to him, Rabbi Yoshia de Dorei, the same generation as Rabbi Ozer. And Rabbi Ozer says to him, Lo teisev hakaroch, don't sit down, don't sit on your feet. But don't means don't sit down, ad mifarshis lo loha milsa, until you explain the following. If the Rabbi Yoshia being addressed was the elder Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi Ozer wouldn't have spoken to him in this somewhat familiar or offhanded fashion. So, what does Rabbi Ozer want from Rabbi Yoshia? To explain minayin lemincha Sotah shituna tenufa. From where do you know that the Sotah meal offering requires waving? The Gemara asks, Min Olon, you're asking from where do you know this? V'heinif ksiv. Well, when you look at the psukim, it says it shall be waved. No, the question is, B'bailim min Olon. How do you know that the owner, in this case the woman, has to do the waving? And it's going to be, of course, in conjunction with the Kohen, as you saw in the Mishnah. The answer is Asya Yad Mishlomim. Through a word comparison, we come to this conclusion. A note, by the way, this is a long answer. Ksiv Hacha, it says by the Sotah, V'lokach HaKohen miyad ha'isha. Uksiv Hasam, in the case of Shlomim, a korban Shlomim, Yadav Teviena. Now that Yadav Teviena is a reference to the owner of the Shlomim brings the Shlomim. And you have, in the Sotah, it says, Lokach HaKohen miyad. So you have the word Yad and Yadav. Ma kan Kohen, just like by the Sotah, it states Kohen. Af lahalon Kohen. So too in the case of the Shlomim, one should understand that the Kohen participates in the waving action. Uma lahalon bailim, and just like over there by the Shlomim, the owner participates. Af kan bailim, so too by the Sotah meal offering, the owner participates. Okay, it's not so. How is it to be done after all is said and done? Meiniach yodoi tachas yedei habailim umeinif. The Kohen places his hands under the hands of the owner, and on top of all these hands is the sacrifice, umeinif, and waving takes place. Heinif, higish, komatz, vehiktir, v'hashar ne'ach ala kehanim, hoya mashke v'achakach makriv es minchasa. You can see this is all a quote from the Mishnah. And we ask, by looking at the Mishnah, look at how we've dashed, underlined. Notice the right in between the lines, v'hiktir. The mincha was offered, and it said the balance is eaten by the kehanim, and it went on in the Mishnah to say, she drinks and then the mincha is offered. But ha'akrifot was already offered. Hachi ka'omar. So here we have a rereading or re-understanding of the Mishnah. The Mishnah would read Seder Menochas Ketzad. What is the order of the offering of the Mincha? Heinif v'hekish, komatz v'hiktir, v'ashar nechel l'kohanim. Ubashka gufa, with regard to the Sotah drinking, which is part of the Sotah ceremony, it's not a mincha halacha, it's something unique to the Sotah. So regarding her drinking, Pligi, Rav Shimon, Rabbanon, they have a machlokes regarding the positioning of the drinking. The Rabbanon savri mashke v'akach makriv es minchasa. The Rabbanon hold she drinks before the mincha is actually offered. And Rav Shimon savar makriv es minchasa v'akach mashke. Rav Shimon holds the proper way, the choice way of doing things is having the mincha offered and then she drinks. Shenema v'achar yashke. As the pasuk says, and afterwards she drinks. V'im hishka v'achar kach ikriv es minchasa ksheira. We saw that Rabbi Shimon, even though he held that the mincha is offered first and then the drinking, if the drinking takes place first and then the offering of the mincha, it's also acceptable. We turn to Omid Beis, Tonu Rabbana. Before we read the Gemara, a word of, let's say, the approach we're going to take to this section. First of all, you notice there's a framed section. We have a Tanaic source, we have a Brisa, and the Brisa is not that clear as you read it. There will be numerous references to the drinking where the Brisa quotes the word v'hishka, word from the pasuk. Before we actually go into the text, we're going to look together at the relevant psukim from Bamidbar, Perek Hey, psukim Chof Dalet through Chof Zayin. Note that we've included in the Masechet Sotah, we've included the relevant psukim for those who have a HaRav Ozer volume at the end of the Masechta. Otherwise, use a chumash, and you'll notice in the course of these psukim, which we'll read in order, psukim Chof Daled through Chof Zayin, note that the drinking is referred to 3 times. After we read the psukim, we'll then read the Tanaic source, and after we read the Tanaic source with very little explanation, we're then going to go through, Amir Tzashem, if we still find it necessary, we'll go through the Rashi on this, so that that which appears a bit obscure will then appear meaningful. So first we turn to the Chumash, Bamidbar, Perek Hey, Pasuk Chof Daled. It says, V'hishka es ha'isha es mei hamorim hamorim uvol bo hamayim hamorim lemorim. Without translating word for word, the pasuk says the woman is given the bitter waters, the Sotah waters to drink, and they enter her. Pasuk Chof Hey, V'lokach HaKohen yad elisha es minchas haknois v'heinif es hamincha l'fnei Hashem v'ikriv oisa el hamizbeach. And the Kohen takes the mincha from the woman, and the mincha is then waved and offered. Pasuk Chavav, V'komatz HaKohen min hamincha es askrasa v'iktir hamizbecha. The Kohen takes the handful and offers it on the altar. V'achar yashke es ho'isha es hamoyim. And then she is given to drink. So here you see a second reference to drinking. We saw at the beginning of Pasuk Chof Daled, V'hishka. Here it says V'achar yashke. Pasuk Chof Zayin, V'hishka es hamayim. V'oisa im nitma v'timol ma'al v'isha. Uvol b'amayim morim v'tzof sebitnu v'nofel yirecha. And if she in fact has been defiled after this drinking, then she will suffer, her belly bloats and her leg falls. And the woman is a curse amongst the nation. Again, we emphasize by going through these psukim, you see V'hishka referred to 3 times. By the way, and just if the listening audience will allow me an editorial note, here's an example of the written law, the scriptures, being very, very difficult to understand. without the belief and the recognition and we'll say the authenticity of the Torah Sheba'al Peh as being given to the Jewish people at the same time the written law was given, as essentially a guide in how to understand it, the scriptures, I would say, would leave a lot to be desired in trying to appreciate what is being written. It's a great deal of repetition, and there's also the order is confounding, which is before which. Very difficult piece of work to understand in and of itself, especially when you're dealing with a section of the Torah that's not allegory, it's telling me procedure. Wouldn't you expect it to be something clear and spelled out? And therefore, the oral tradition, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, is an essential element without which you basically cannot understand a word of that which appears in the Chumash. So with that introduction in mind, we give the proper kavod, the proper honor due to the Torah Sheba'al Peh in deciphering this section of the Torah. We read the Psukim. We now turn to the Gemara itself. We read the Tanaic source. In the marked Gemaras, you'll see that we've written Psukim in. The write-ins are taken from the Rashi. So, Tana Rabbanan, V'hishka, it mentions the drinking in Pasuk Chav Daled, Ma Talmud Lomar. What's the purpose of mentioning it over there? Valo Kvar Nemar V'hishka. In Pasuk Chav Zayin, there's a reference to her drinking. So, what's the significance of the drinking in Pasuk Chav Daled? It is an allusion to a halacha. Shin nimchika Megillah. If you have a woman whose Sotah Torah portion that was written out on parchment and it was already erased over the water, the oimeres, and she says, Eini shoisa, I refuse to drink. The mechika, the erasure, was referred to in Pasuk Chav Gimel. And it was erased early. It was erased before the mincha was offered. It was erased prematurely. Once again, before the mincha was offered. And that's a wrong thing to do. Because what should be is first the mincha is offered, and then the erasure, and then the drinking. And what they did, in this, we'll say, contingency case, what they did is they did the erasure, and then they did the offering. So they were makdim, they prematurely erased before the offering of the meal offering. Let's say that happened. And she says, I'm not drinking. We don't allow her to follow her will, but rather she has to drink. Me'ar'arin oisa umashkin oisa ba'al korcha. Divrei Rebbe Akiva. We force her into drinking. And all of that is contained in Pasuk Chav Daled when it says there, and she shall drink. So again, we're referring to a case of insisting and forcing her to drink in a case where the parsha was erased prematurely, even though the mincha had not yet been offered. That doesn't matter. We continue. Rabbi Shimon Omer. It's pointed out in Rashi that Rabbi Shimon is not arguing on that which Rabbi Kiva just taught. V'achar yashkeh. This is a reference to Pasuk Chav Vav. Ma Talmud Lomar. What do I need that for? V'alo kvar nemar v'hishka. It says in Pasuk Chav Zayin that she drinks. Elo li'achar kol ha'maisim kulun ha'amurin lemala. What Pasuk Chav Vav tells me is that the drinking takes place provided all the other procedures that were mentioned earlier have taken place. Ma'gid, this teaches us, Gimel Dvarim Ma'akvin Ba. There are three actions that are prerequisites for her drinking, without which she doesn't drink. Ad shelo korav hakometz, the mincha will have to have been offered, and this, of course, is Shitas Reb Shimon that says first mincha and then drinking. V'ad shelo nimcha megillah, the woman is not going to drink unless the megillah, the portion containing the Sotah in psukim was erased. V'ad shelo tekabel olel shvua, and she's not going to drink unless she affirmed the oaths that were imposed upon her. The Gemara now goes over these last 3 points. Just like you see numbers in the Tanaic source, you see numbers that follow in the Gemara. Number 1, Ad shelo korav hakometz, the drinking is not going to take place unless the offering of the handful of the barley meal offering has already taken place. The kometz is the handful. Reb Shimon l'tamei, the Omar makriv es minchosov yachakach mashke. This is a reflection of Reb Shimon's point. L'tamei means he is consistent here with what he says in general, that the mincha is offered first and then the drinking, so that the mincha offering is a prerequisite for her drinking. Number 2, ad shelo nimchaka megillah. Does this really need to be taught that she doesn't drink unless the Megillah was erased? Well, my mashkilah, it's obvious. It's in other words, you're telling me in point number 2 is something that's really unnecessary. It's obvious. What else would she be drinking? She's not drinking water from a water cooler. She's drinking water in which the parsha has been erased. Amar Ravashi, lo nitzrucha l'rishumo nikr. What point number 2 is telling me is that if the erasure took place, but the writing was still visible on the original parchment, it wasn't fully erased, she does not drink until that is taken care of, until it's re-erased. In other words, you have to erase it again to make sure there's nothing left on the parchment itself. Point 3, ad shelo tekabel shvua, until she doesn't drink unless she affirmed the oath. These are all points, by the way, that we've spoken about in recent shiurim. So if you're a first-time listener and you're not familiar with the oath that we're referring to, or the parchment and the erasure, of course, by all means, you will have had to have learned the previous dapim in order to appreciate this. So the acceptance or the affirmation of the shvua, the Gemara now infers, Mishtahu delo shasya. It seems that we're saying she doesn't drink unless she affirms the shvua. So the drinking requires the shvua to precede it. However, ha michtav kasvila. But are you saying that it will be, the parsha will be written out before the shvua? In other words, the way we're presenting things in point 3 gives you the impression that the parsha was written out before the shvua. The shvua is the oath. So it's all prepared, and then the oath is imposed on the woman, and then she drinks. But that very point, or that we'll say that inference, is not accurate. How can you say that the parsha could be written before the oath? V'omar rava megillah Sotah shekosva koidem shetekabel shvua lo osav lo klum. The Sotah section, the Sotah portion that's written before she accepts upon herself the oath, it's worthless. The Gemara says, you've got a very strong point, and therefore, kedi nasva. Rashi, toward the end of the narrow lines, last narrow line, kedi nasva shalolut sorech. This point 3 is stated, but it's really unnecessary. The point 3 suggested that she'll drink when she accepts the shvua, leaving the impression that the parsha had been written beforehand. That's not true. Not only does the shvua have to precede the drinking, but the shvua itself must precede the writing. It's not accurate to suggest that the shvuah comes immediately before the drinking. The shvuah is even earlier than the writing. The Gemara now goes on with the question of B'mai komifliki. And here, the question is directed at the machlokus in the Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon. Tanakama said, first drinking and then mincha. Rabbi Shimon said, first mincha and then drinking. Before we go further in the Gemara, though, let us go over Rashi. And we said Rashi spells out that which we've already explained, but it doesn't hurt, and it will certainly benefit by going over the Rashi. We're starting Rashi from the top. He deals first with the textual issues. Hachi garsino tonu rabbanon v'hishka matamud lomer v'lo kvar nemar v'hishka sheim nimchaka v'chulei. All of this is in the text that we have. V'lo garsino baser bereisha v'kama b'seifo she'ein ze loshen brayso pirush mishubishu v'to b'valo kvar nemar. Again, Rashi's dealing with alternative texts that he says are erroneous, and it's because they erred in what the text says, what the Brisa says, the expression "v'alo kvar nemar." We saw that on the top line, and that gives you the impression that something earlier was stated. The mashma shezeh nemar mitchila, and really that's not the case. V'hachi pirush. Now this is where we want to really focus. Seder Mikros Kahu. The order of the psukim is as follows. The Kosavu Mocha, that you find in Pasuk of Gimel. That means there's the writing, the erasure, the Hishka, Pasuk of Daled, a drinking, Pasuk of Hey, Vehenif Es HaMincha Veikriv, the Hainu Hagosha, there's a waving of the Mincha, and then Vikriv is the bringing of the Mincha to the corner of the Mizbeach. The komatz v'hiktir, that's in Pasuk Chavav. Why does Rashi say the hainu hagosha? Because the word v'hikriv could be misunderstood. V'hikriv, when a person says he's makriv a korban, when you use that expression, that means it's offered, it's put on the fire, and it's completely taken care of. Not so over here, because in Pasuk Chavav you see the actual burning of the handful. So v'hikriv, Rashi has to tell you, is simply the carrying of the korban to the corner of the mizbeach. That is the meal offering. And in Pasuk Havav, the komatz viktir, the handful is taken and it's put on the fire. V'achar yashke esu isho es hamayim, that's also in Pasuk Havav. Notice the double underlining that we've done. This is to highlight the references to drinking. V'hodar suksiv hashko shlishis, a third reference to drinking in Pasuk of Zayin, v'hishko es hamayim voiso im nitma'a. V'ko'omar Rabbi Akiva, v'hishko es ha'isha dichtiv, the drinking that's written before haktoras hamincha, before the offering. So you have drinking and then offering. Ma talmud lomar. What is the significance of speaking about a drinking that's before the offering of the mincha? V'alo kvar nemar achar haktoras hamincha v'hishko es hamayim v'hu dafkahu. How can you speak about the drinking before the mincha when, as far as Rabbi Akiva is concerned, the mincha is first and then the drinking? And that's what he sees in the psukim Chav Vav and then Chav Zayin. Chav Vav refers to the Haktorah, and then in Chav Zayin, a drinking. And that is dafka, means that's meduyak, that is precise. V'yein ho rishon dafka, the rishon Pasuk Chav Daled, which makes reference to a drinking before the mincha, is not a presentation of, let's say, precision order. It's not there for order purposes. From the fact that in Pasuk Chavav it says, and afterwards she shall drink. Shma mino hashko achar haktorah. It says, and after the mincha she drinks. So you see, the drinking is after the haktorah. He. Umat hamad lomar vishka seisha achar hamechika. What's the purpose of having a reference to drinking in Pasuk Chav Daled following the erasure in Pasuk Chav Gimel? And that drinking seems to be before the mincha, and that's not true. What's it there for? L'lamdecha, it teaches me sh'im nimcha l'kol megillah. If the mincha was erased, v'omra eini shoisa, v'lohoidis loimer tameani, she says, I'm not drinking. And she's not confessing, I am guilty. She's simply, I don't want to drink. Ma'aron oisa, klomar, what does ma'aron mean? Poischin piyah shelo b'toivasa, we forcibly open her mouth, v'shoifchen samayim l'sech groina, and we pour the water into her throat. V'afilu nimchaka megillah koidem haktorah, even if the erasure took place before the mincha was offered, the shelo kedin asu hakayanim, that is a wrong thing to do. Let's skip the bracketed section that you see here in the Rashi. Afilu hachi, even so, even though the erasure was done prematurely before the mincha was offered, afilu hachi hayul v'nimchaka, since it was erased, v'afilu shelo kedin, even if done improperly, ein shomin lo lomar eini shoisa. We don't listen to her in saying, I don't want to drink. Eloi tishtel, either she drinks, or tivada, she confesses her guilt. Ulekachne mar v'hishka, that's why Chav Daled, in Pasuk Chav Daled says v'hishka, achar hamechika, right after the erasure mentioned in Pasuk Gimel, lo shetishte miyad achar hamechika. We're not saying that it means she drinks immediately after the erasure. Elo hokomashmalon shamachika go remes lo lishtos. The point, this juxtaposition of drinking with the erasure tells us the erasure forces her to drink under the circumstances that we already said. Namely, if she's not confessing her guilt and she's trying to maintain her claim, she's simply insisting, I don't want to drink. The fact that the erasure took place does not enable her to have her way. We skipped a couple lines in the Rashi in order to keep a very smooth flow in the reading. Let's go back over those skipped lines. The reference was made at that point, right before the brackets. The Rashi said that even if the mechika, the erasure, took place before the offering of the mincha, which is shelo kedin asu hakayanim, the kevon di'ena shoisa ad la'achar haktorah, since Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion, like Rabbi Shimon, that first mincha, first burning of korban mincha, and then drinking, lo hoyelem limchoik, they shouldn't have erased so early. They shouldn't have erased before the mincha. The chol ma sheus la'achir es hamachika, any opportunity to delay the erasure, the erasure, don't forget, involves erasing God's name. That's what the Torah demands, but it's a very emotionally difficult thing to do. Me'achrin shema tivadeh. We prefer to delay the erasure because at any point she might confess, I am guilty, and everything would stop there. We can spare ourselves of erasing God's name. So as we went through this Rashi, you noticed how so much attention was paid to all the different psukim referred to, with the bottom line being that the presence of a drinking as late as Pasuk Chav Zayin indicates that the drinking is going to be after the mincha was already done, and that point is, let's say, bolstered by the fact that in Pasuk Chav Vav it said after the mincha, it says v'achar yashkeh, afterwards she drinks, namely after the mincha. So there you see order is quite clear. What's the early reference to drinking in Pasuk Chav Daled? So as we explained, it's referring to a situation where the woman is saying, I don't want to drink, and the parsha has already been erased. It's too late. It's a point of no return. She cannot have her way. Let's continue with the Rashi. Here Rashi turns his attention to Rabbi Shimon in the Tanaic source. What was he saying? Rabbi Shimon Omer. Let's just repeat ourselves. It's a very important point as for later in the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva are not arguing regarding the order of mincha drinking. First mincha offering, then drinking. Rabbi Shimon Omer, we're reading in the Rashi where we left off. Rabbi Shimon Omer, v'achar yashkeh, that was in Pasuk Chavav. Ma Talmud Lomar, why do you have to say that? V'halo kfar nemar v'hishka, the fact that a woman drinks is referred to already in Pasuk Chav Daled. Lo poligad Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Shimon is not coming to argue with Rabbi Kiva. Elamor dorish hai kro, umor dorish hai kro. Rather, Rabbi Kiva, he offered his chidush on Pasuk Chav Daled, and Rabbi Shimon will offer his drosha on Pasuk Chavav. V'hachi omar lekamon mishmaitin. The Travaim Svirulei, both, this will be stated later in our sugya, that both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon hold makriv min chosav akach mashke. They are not arguing about that. The point in the Gemara that we're going to pick up with them, Yirtz Hashem, is going to ask regarding this issue where the Chachomim in the Mishnah do disagree with Reb Shimon regarding the order. Where the Chachomim hold first drinking and then mincha, what are the sources for the Rabbanan? But as far as Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva, they're in agreement regarding the order. First mincha, then drinking. So, what does Rabbi Shimon see in Pasuk Chavav, where it says V'achar yashkeh? Valo kfar nemar pasuk shlishi. We're continuing in the Rashi. There's a third pasuk Chav Zayin, v'hishka es hamayim li'achar haktorah. It says that she drinks the water, and that's after the mincha was offered. Ma Talmud Lomer v'achar yashkeh. So what do I need pasuk Chav Vav for? The answer to that is Achar kol amaisim kulanu amurim lamala. We say afterwards she drinks. The afterwards is the word of emphasis. After all the things that were mentioned prior. And we went through those points already in the Gemara. Now we go back to our Gemara. We're picking up with the expression b'mai komifilgi. I hope everyone sees where we are in the Gemara. It's about a third of the way down, 2/5 of the way down from the top. The last word in line is komifligi. Notice, where we're picking up now, b'mai komifligi, we have a semicolon before that, and that's put in quite deliberately. Because if you didn't have that marking, and you just read b'mai komifligi, you might very well think that it's a throwback to what we stated immediately before, namely Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon. Well, we already pointed out, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon are not arguing. So, why the question of b'mai komifligi? The answer is it's not referring to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon. It's referring rather to the Tanakama of the Mishnah and Rabbi Shimon. They had an argument. The Tanakama of the Mishnah held first drinking, then mincha. Rabbi Shimon holds first mincha, then drinking. So what's the basis of their machlokes? Before we go further, because by just your eye skimming ahead, you notice different markings. You have diamonds, double underlines, triangles. What do all these things represent? So on the side of the Gemara, we have our nosei mivne heading. The diamond highlights machlokes tanoim. Notice in the diamond you have the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon are highlighted. Machlokes tanoim, mashke makrivo ahefech, is the order drinking and then offering the mincha, or offering mincha and then drinking. The triangle highlights the term legufo. Machloikes tanoim hamuskar liel, which ezer pasuk yesh lidrosh legufo haseder. Which pasuk is the pasuk that will indicate the actual order for us? Once we establish which pasuk is the defining pasuk for order, so the other pasuk, the other psukim, they are the ones that need to be explained. And the double underline is there to highlight the psukim. Hadgoshas apsukim. Now the Gemara. B'mai komifligi. Again, what are they arguing about? The Tanakama and Reb Shimon of the Mishnah. And since order for many of us is at times confusing, we've included on the side, very briefly, on the side of our Gemara, notice in the margin, Tanakama holds mashke v'achar makriv, first drinking, then offering, of meal offering, and then Reb Shimon makriv v'achar mashke. So you can always keep one finger on that to keep things straight. The Gemara continues. Tlosa kroi ksivi. Note, by the way, we have a long answer marking. All of this section of Gemara is to give us the basis of that Tanaic controversy. So there are 3 psukim. Vishka kama, pasuk chav daled. V'achar yashke, pasuk chav vov. V'hishka basra, pasuk chav zayin. If anyone remembers the opening of the Rashi that we read at the top, on the second line from the top, he mentioned V'lo garsinan basra bereish v'kama b'seifa, and Rashi says that's not the lashon of a brisa. That is quite true. We didn't read that in the brisa, but here you do see the words kama and basra used. This is not a Tanaic section. This is the Gemara itself, and it's therefore appropriate to see these words. So we made reference to the 3 words of drinking. Rabbanon Savri. The Rabbanon who hold, what do they hold? They hold first drinking and then offering of mincha. Well, they hold like this. Vehishka kama legufo. And notice the word legufo is in a triangle. We want to highlight the point of controversy. The Rabbanon hold that pasuk of Daled, which is we'll say the earliest reference to drinking, i.e. before mincha, that is for itself, for the purpose of teaching order. Shemashke v'achakach makriv es minchasa. It's here to teach me that first drinking and then offering of mincha, which is referred to in the subsequent psukim. Pasuk chavav v'achar yashke, that is miboya le sherishumo nikar. It's needed for that halacha. Notice you have an arrow to the immediate right-hand side of the Gemara, and this was referred to earlier, that the drinking takes place only if the erasure has been fully successful, not if something is still left. Rishumo means the image of the original writing is still visible. That cannot be. That has to be taken care of. It has to be erased also. And vehishka basra she'im nimchaka megillah v'oimeres eini shoisa. This also a halacha we saw before, that pasuk of Zion tells me that she must drink. Namely, if you have a situation where the Megillah was erased, the ink was scratched off, which is essentially the way the erasure is done, and she says, I don't want to drink. She has to drink. We force her to drink even against her will. Rabbi Shimon Sovar, V'achar yashke legufo. This pasuk is for Reb Shimon, the indicator of order. And what does it say? And afterwards she drinks, which indicates shemakriv es minchasa v'achar kach mashke. First the mincha is offered, and then the drinking. Vehishka kamo, the drinking in pasuk chof dalid. Shem hishka v'achar kach hikriv es minchasa kshera. If things were done out of order, this is Reb Shimon. We saw this in the Mishnah. If it's done out of order, it's still okay. In other words, if the drinking took place before the mincha, as you can see in Pasuk of Daled, you have drinking before references made to the offering of the mincha. So if that took place, it's also okay. That's Reb Shimon consistent with what he said in the Mishnah. Vehishka basra, this is the same as the Rabbanan. From Pasuk of Zion, they derive Shim Nimchaka Megillah V'Yomra Eini Shoisa Ma'ar Noisa Mashnoisa Baal Korcha. Now the Rabbanan response to Reb Shimon's approach. According to Reb Shimon, Pasuk Chavdalid taught me a contingency situation. According to Reb Shimon, Pasuk Chavdalid told me something that isn't a first choice. And to say that the opening pasuk regarding drinkings is telling me something that's not lechatchila, that's something that's b'di'evet, meaning post facto, that the Rabbanan see is unfit as far as the scripture is concerned. Why would you open up a section dealing with something that's not the first choice When you want to tell us a story, you want to tell us halachas, you start with the right way to do things, and then you can tell us later on about contingency cases. So that's the Rabbanan's objection to Reb Shimon's use of Pasuk Chaf Daled. Reb Shimon used it for a contingency, and the Rabbanan used Pasuk Chaf Daled to tell me legufo. And that's what the Gemara means here for Rabbanan. B'di'eved lo Pasach Kra. As far as the Rabbanan are concerned, Pasach Kra is a reference to the opening Pasuk, Pasuk Chaf Daled, wouldn't be there to tell me something that's post facto, that's only if you happen to do it, and it's not the best way. And therefore the Rabbanan said regarding Pasuk Chaf Daled, that being that it's the opening Pasuk, and it speaks there about drinking even before the Mincha, they come to the conclusion that drinking is done first, and then the Mincha is offered. And now we go back to Rabbi Akiva. And here we have a double star to the side of the Gemara text, the immediate right-hand side of the Gemara text. Align this with what you see above, and the third line from the top, way above, Rabbi Akiva made the point that if the Megillah was erased, even if done prematurely, she cannot refuse to drink. She cannot say Eini Shoisa and expect us to heed her request. The Gemara asks, V'sover Rabbi Akiva mashken loiso ba'al kocha? Does Rabbi Akiva really hold from that approach that a woman can be made to drink forcibly? V'ha Tanya. We have a Tanaic source in which Rabbi Akiva appears halfway into the source. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kalbus shel barzel matim l'soich piyah. Kalbus is a vessel, a utensil. Rashi describes it in more precise terms. Rashi in the wide lines, more than halfway down the wide lines, says Shnei Shinayim Yesh Lo V'Nosein L'Soich Piyah Zakuf. Seems to be a double-pronged entity that's placed upright in her mouth. If you put this into a person's mouth, it'll keep the mouth open forcibly. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Kalbus shel barzel being iron, and iron kalbus, that the double-pronged entity, matilin l'soich piyah, we put in her mouth. Shim nimchika Megillah v'yamra eini shoisa. In a situation where the Megillah was erased and she claims, or she says, I'm not going to drink, well, we then force her, and we use this kalbus in order to force her mouth to remain open. Omar Rabbi Akiva, klumanu tzrichim elo lebodcha. Isn't our whole purpose here to check her out, to establish her guilt or innocence? Falo beduka v'yomedes. By her saying, I'm not drinking, she's being molded. She's confessing that she's guilty. She doesn't want to drink because she knows if she drinks, she's going to die. So she confesses, yes, I had illicit relations with another man. Elo ad shelo korav hakometz yecholo lachzor ba. Before the kometz, the mincha, is offered, she can back out. She can say, I am not drinking. Mishikorav hakometz eino yecholo lachzor ba. Once the mincha is offered, she cannot back out. She cannot say, I'm not drinking. Rashi, yecholo lachzor ba. I hope you see we're on the line after the kalbus line. She can yecholo lachzor ba v'lomar, and say, eini shoisa. I'm not drinking. V'ein oinsin oisa. And we don't force her. By her saying, I don't want to drink, she's confessing that she's guilty. And that's our whole goal over here, to come to a conclusive statement on her part, that namely, that I am guilty. Of course, if she's refusing to say that, then the hope is, of course, that she's innocent and that the water won't have any effect on her. But if she's saying, I'm not drinking, well, if you're innocent, why wouldn't you drink? Why are you saying, I don't want to drink? That's tantamount to saying, I'm guilty. Oh, I'm guilty, so there's no need for her to drink. Because when a woman says, I am guilty, the whole process stops. Let's read the next Rashi also. Mishikorav hakometz. We saw in this Tanaic source, Rabbi Akiva concluded by saying that once the kometz is offered, l'kamei porech, later in the Gemara, the question will arise, he gufa kashya. This presentation of Rabbi Kiva has an inherent contradiction to it, or an inherent difficulty. Amai eino yechola lachzor. Why do you say that once the mincha is offered, she cannot back out? That would mean she has to drink. Doesn't the same logic apply that by her saying, I don't want to drink, she's confessing her guilt? Now, let's go back to the Gemara. Second wide line, after the Tanaic source. First of all, we raised the question, how can Rabbi Kiva, third line from the top of this Omid, be portrayed or presented as saying forced drinking? When you read this source, you see that a woman who says Eini Shaisa, there's no need to force her to drink. So this is the question that the Gemara is asking, we'll say, from this source on Rabbi Kiva above. According to you that see this source as a difficulty for what was said above, well, isn't this source inherently gufa? It itself is difficult. The last statement here was that once the koimetz is offered, Rabbi Kiva says she can't back out. What does that mean, she can't back out? She can't say, Eini Shaisa, I don't want to drink. Why not? When she says, I don't want to drink, that is the ultimate checking. That's the ultimate revelation of her guilt. Lo kashya. The source is not inherently difficult. In fact, this whole issue of her Eini Shaisa comment, I don't want to drink, do we force her or not? It depends. Ha de kahadra machmas resisa, v'ha de kahadra ba machmas briusa, v'hachi komar. Before we go on in the Gemara, in order to define these terms, resisa, trembling, briusa, with confidence, let's see what Rashi says. De kahadra machmas briusa. Ha de katani beduka v'oimedes. The source that we saw in the last narrow line of the Gemara Vala beduka v'oimedes, which means that when she says, I don't want to drink, she's essentially confessing. De kahadra ba machmas briusa, who she is backing out with an air of confidence. Briusa, from what bori means health, means an air of confidence. She'eno rosesa, she's not trembling. The komra eini shosa, I'm not drinking. Vadai tameahi, she's definitely guilty. Ulakach eno roseses, she's therefore not trembling. The somcha meikora, the omra, she's already planned this out from the outset. Somcha means she's reliant from the outset, the omra, and she calculates. Ki motina lemishti, when the time for drinking comes, lo shasina, I am not going to drink. V'lo shno korav koimetz, v'lo shno lo korav, regardless of whether the mincha was offered or not. Lo shasya, I'm not drinking. As is explained as we go on in our explanation, kol machmas briusa, klal lo shasya afilu kirva koimetz. The woman who is saying Eini Shaisa with an air of confidence, we figure that she's got this all planned out from the beginning. She's scheming. You don't see a nervous lady over here. And the whole thing is part of a scheme that she knows she's guilty, and she knows the water is going to have this deathful effect on her, and therefore she's saying Eini Shaisa. That is a testimony of guilt. I know that we're sounding a little repetitious here, but if you see a woman who, with an air of confidence, is saying, I'm not drinking, that's what Rabbi Kiva was saying when he said she's beduka ve'medes. And certainly there's no need to force her to drink. The seeming distinction that was made between the mincha having been offered or not, that's That's referring to a woman who is hodra. She's backing out. She's saying, I don't want to drink, but she's trembling. She is not a scheming woman. She didn't have this planned out from the beginning. Shanu royanoi saw roisesis. We see she's shaking. De'iko lemeimar. There's room to think. De'eno ma'amenes. Shalivdeku amayim vafilu hi Torah. She's got this tremendous, we'll say, belief in the strength of the water, so much so that it's going to kill even if she's innocent. She would really like to rely on her innocence and drink, but she's afraid. She's afraid because she thinks that the water isn't so discriminatory between the innocent and the guilty. She's trembling. When the time comes to drink, she wants to back out. Therefore we say as follows. If the mincha has not been offered yet, and she says, Eini shoisa, so she can back out. And if the mincha was already offered, she has to drink. Ubraisa kamaisid le'al diktanim maranosa. The Brisa 3 lines from the top said we force her to drink. B'machmas resisa kamar. She was trembling, and it appears that according to this explanation, she was trembling, and the mincha was already offered. Now let's read that in the Gemara. V'hachi kamar. There's no contradiction in Rabbi Akiva. Kol machmas briusa. A woman who is saying Eini Shoisa with an air of confidence. Klal lo shasya, she does not drink. And it's regarding that Rabbi Akiva made his comment, she's beduka v'oimedes. Machmas resisa, if she is backing out and you see she's trembling. Ad shelo korav hakoimetz, dakati lo imchuk megillah. Before, if this statement of hers, I don't want to drink, is before the mincha was offered. If you recall earlier in our shiur, we said that we tried to delay the erasing of the Megillah as much as possible. And, of course, according to Rabbi Akiva, the order of things is first the mincha and then the drinking. So that the Megillah is not going to be erased. If you do things properly, it's not going to be erased until the mincha is already offered. So if you're at a point in time before the mincha has been offered, the erasure certainly hasn't taken place yet. So you have the woman saying, I don't want to drink. The mincha has not yet been offered, so we'll allow her way. Inami imchut Megillah, even if, however, the Megillah was erased, the shelo kedin ovid karim demachki, where the Kohanim did something wrong. They erased it before the offering of the komets. Nevertheless, motzi hadra ba. Since we're at a time before the mincha was offered, she can back out. She can stand her ground of eini shoisa. Mishikorav hakometz. Once the komets was offered and the Megillah was erased, the bedin ovid kayan demachki. Once the offering of the meal offering took place, it's correct now for the Megillah to be erased. The Kohanim function properly. Lo motzi hadraba. She can't back out. She then, and that's what Rabbi Akiva above was saying, we force her to drink. We continue at the top of Daf Chof. Kashya de Rabbi Akiva ad Rabbi Akiva. We highlight with this double underline 2 points. Hasam Omar Mechika Ma'akva. There he had said that the erasure, let's say a binding factor with regard to forcing her. Namely, if the Mechika was done, even if the komets was not offered, once the Mechika is done, she has to drink. V'hacha Omar Kometz Ma'akev. And here we're saying that the kometz is the ma'akev, is the binding factor. Whereas before we said that if the erasure is done, even if it's done before the offering of the kometz, that's it, she can't back out, we'll force her to drink. And here we're saying, no, the offering of the kometz is ma'akev, which leads us to think that even if the erasure had taken place and the kometz has not been offered, she wouldn't be forced to drink. Let's take a look at Rashi at the top. Kashya der Bekiva Hosimar Mechika Makfa Es Ha'onis. That the mechika is the binding factor for ones. Ones means the forced drinking. The cholzman shalonim chika, as long as the parsha hasn't been erased. Imam reini shoisa. If she says, I don't want to drink, yechoilo lachzor bo, she can back out. The lo ansinon lo lashkoisa, we don't force her to drink. Avalim nimchika amegila amara noisa korcha. If the Megillah is erased, we force her to drink the filu lo kirev hakoimetz, even if the handful of the barley meal offering was not yet offered. Da the hishka kama, the drinking that you find in Pasuk Chav Dalid, the koidem haktorah, it's before the mincha is offered. Lahachi darshinon. We explained it for that purpose, that namely the juxtaposition of mechika, which was in Pasuk Chav Gimel with the drinking, and Pasuk Chav Dalet tells me that if the mechika is done, then she has to drink. No kometz on the scene yet. Doesn't matter. Once the mechika is done, she has to drink. The hacha komar kometz makev asoines the chokama de lo kara of kometz. As long as the handful was not offered, we wouldn't force her to drink. So how do you resolve these two statements of Rabbi Kiva? The Gemara continues and says, Trei tanoi valiba de Rabbi Kiva. It's what we're seeing here is simply two different later Tanaic opinions as to what Rabbi Kiva actually holds. Ibaya laho. Omra eini shoisa machamas briusa. A woman says, I don't want to drink, and she says it with confidence. V'chazra v'omra shoisani. And then she says, I want to drink. Mahu. What do we say? Kevan di'omreini shoisa. Do we say that once she says, I don't want to drink, Tameani kamra, she's in effect saying, I am guilty. V'kevan da'achsik nafshe betuma. And once she establishes her status as being guilty, tuma means defilement, as being a guilty individual, lo matzia hadraba. She can't back out. She can't change her status. Once she's established she's tamea, that's it. She can't now say, I want to drink. Oy dilma, kevan yamra shoisani, or do we say that since she is saying, I want to drink, Galya daita, this reveals to us the machmas be'atusa u the amra, that her original statement of I don't want to drink was really out of, we'll call it internal fear. The external air of confidence that she seemed to exude was in fact misleading. Teku. So this remains unresolved. Omar avua d'shmuel tzorach shitein mor l'soch hamayim. The water that the Sotah is going to drink has to have added to it more. More means something bitter. My taima. Why do you have to add something bitter to the water? The pasuk says, Mei hamorim, the waters of bitterness, which indicates shemorim kvar. They were bitter already. And Rashi points out that this is here to exclude a possible alternative explanation one might have given to Mei Amorim, the waters of bitterness, because of the curse that these waters represent to the guilty woman. So here the Gemara is saying, no, it's not called the waters of bitterness because of the curse that these waters represent, but rather it's because something bitter is added to it, making the water bitter. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.